It was an unusually bright and sunny morning when the group of special needs tourists arrived at the gates of the royal palace. The tall stone walls and grand architecture of the palace stood in front of them, towering above like something out of a fairy tale. There was a buzz in the air, a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. Today was a day they had all been waiting for, a chance to witness something they had only seen in pictures and on television. A chance to watch the famous royal guards who stood motionless for hours, maintaining their stiff, proud posture, guarding the palace gates. The group, led by their cheerful but attentive tour guide, slowly made their way towards the entrance. There were about 20 of them, all varying in age and ability. Some were in wheelchairs, while others walked with the help of a cane or a caregiver. A few had hearing or visual impairments, while others struggled with developmental challenges. But no matter their individual struggles, they all shared one thing in common. Today was a special day. Today they would get to see the legendary royal guards up close. The group was a mix of excitement and anticipation. They talked among themselves, each person wondering what it would feel like to be so close to the guards who had long been a symbol of the country's history and tradition. They had all read about the guards' unshakable discipline, their ability to stand still for hours without flinching or moving. It seemed almost impossible to them, but today they would see it with their own eyes. Some of the tourists were a little nervous. It wasn't easy for everyone to be in such a large, bustling crowd. For many of them, the noise and energy of a busy public event like this could be overwhelming. A young boy named James, who had autism, started to feel uneasy as soon as they reached the gates. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, feeling the sudden rush of too many people, too much noise, and too much movement around him. His mother gently took his hand and whispered calming words in his ear, trying to reassure him that everything was fine. James had always struggled with crowds and loud sounds. His mother knew that sometimes it could take him a while to adjust to new surroundings. But she also knew that he was a big fan of horses. The Royal Guard's horses were one of the main attractions for him today. She hoped that once they got closer to the horses, James would relax and enjoy the experience. Across the group, other tourists were also feeling a little overwhelmed. Emma, an older woman in her 60s who had limited mobility, was holding on tightly to her walker. The crowds of people made her nervous, and she wasn't sure she would be able to see much of the ceremony. Her daughter, standing beside her, offered a comforting smile. "It's going to be amazing, Mom. Just wait until you see them, the horses, the guards. It will be worth it." As the group continued to move forward, they were stopped by a line of Royal Palace staff who helped guide the tourists to a special viewing area. This area was set aside for groups with special needs, so that they could enjoy the ceremony without feeling crowded or overwhelmed. The group was grateful for this, as it gave them a chance to see everything up close without the added stress of trying to navigate through the dense crowd. Their guide, a friendly woman named Sarah, gathered the group together. "Now everyone, I want to remind you that we're about to witness something truly special. The royal guards don't just stand there, they are part of a centuries-old tradition. They stand still for hours at a time, and it's almost like they're statues. The ceremony you're about to see is something many people wait years to experience." She paused, noticing that some of the group members were still uneasy. "But don't worry," she added with a reassuring smile. "We're all going to have a great view, and you'll be able to ask questions after the ceremony if you'd like. There's no rush, so feel free to relax and enjoy the moment." James, who had been clutching his mother's hand tightly, now started to calm down a little. He seemed to be intrigued by the sight of the guards' horses in the distance. His mother, sensing that he was starting to focus on something that calmed him, smiled. She whispered to him, "See? The horses are here. You love horses, don't you?" James nodded slightly, though he still seemed unsure. But his eyes were fixed on the horses, and that was a good sign. His mother felt a little more hopeful. Maybe today wouldn't be so difficult for him after all. Emma, too, was feeling a little more relaxed as she settled into her seat. She could see the guards beginning to form a neat line in the distance, their bright red uniforms standing out against the backdrop of the palace. She thought of how her own father used to tell her stories of the royal guards when she was a child, and how much she had looked forward to seeing them one day. Now here she was in the front row, ready to witness the ceremony. Sarah continued speaking, her voice full of enthusiasm. "This ceremony isn't just about the guards. It's also about the history of this place. The guards have been protecting the palace for centuries. It's an honor and a duty. Every movement is timed perfectly. The way they march, the way they turn. It's all part of a tradition that has been passed down for generations. The tourists listened attentively, captivated by Sarah's explanation. Even the ones who had been nervous before began to feel a sense of excitement building inside them. The weight of the moment, the sense of being part of something so historic and meaningful was beginning to settle in. They were no longer just watching from a distance. They were now participants in a live moment of history. James squeezed his mother's hand again, this time a little more gently. She looked down at him, seeing that his nervousness had started to fade. He was looking at the horses again, his eyes filled with curiosity. "You're okay, right?" his mother asked softly. James nodded, and this time he smiled a little. It was small, but it was enough for her to feel a wave of relief. She leaned down to kiss the top of his head. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. The group watched as the royal guards, still perfectly in sync, began their march toward the palace gates. The sound of their boots hitting the ground echoed through the air, and the horses, tall and majestic, followed closely behind. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The hustle and bustle of the crowd, the noise, the movement, it all faded into the background as everyone focused on the spectacle before them. Sarah watched her group, her heart swelling with pride. She knew that this day would be one that they would all remember for the rest of their lives. She couldn't wait to see the smiles on their faces once the ceremony began. Little did she know this ceremony would become something even more special than any of them could have imagined. The excitement in the air was palpable as the royal guards began to march, their bright red uniforms and tall black bearskin hats making them instantly recognizable. The sound of their heavy boots hitting the cobblestones echoed through the street, loud enough that everyone could feel it in their chests. For the special needs tourists, this was a moment they had all been looking forward to. The changing of the guard ceremony was a long-standing tradition, and they were finally going to witness it up close. As the guards moved into position, the crowd around the palace began to settle down. There were people everywhere, some with cameras, others holding up their phones, capturing every moment of the ceremony. But for the tourists in the special needs group, it wasn't just about the spectacle. It was about being part of something bigger, something that had been happening for centuries. James, who had been nervously clutching his mother's hand just moments before, was now completely captivated. He had been quiet since they arrived at the viewing area, unsure about everything happening around him. The noise, the crowd, the unfamiliar faces, it had all been too much. But now, as the guards marched by, something seemed to shift in him. His eyes were wide with wonder as he looked at the horses, their majestic bodies moving in perfect sync with the guards. He seemed to forget the crowds, the noise and the confusion that had made him so anxious just moments earlier. His mother, still holding his hand, could feel the tension in his grip loosening. She looked at him, surprised to see him so still and focused. "You like the horses, don't you?" she whispered, smiling down at him. James nodded, his eyes still fixed on the procession. The royal guards, towering above him on their horses, were performing a routine that was both precise and beautiful. The guards didn't make a sound, their faces stern and unchanging, but there was something mesmerizing about their discipline and the way they moved as one. It was as if everything around them, the crowd, the noise, the hustle, didn't matter. They were in perfect control, and for some reason, that seemed to calm James. Nearby, Emma, the older woman, was watching the ceremony with a sense of awe. She had been waiting for this day for years, ever since she was a little girl, when her father would tell her stories about the royal guards. Her father had always admired the guards, and she had grown up thinking of them as the embodiment of strength and tradition. Now here she was, sitting in the front row, so close that she could almost feel the power of the guards' presence. For Emma, this ceremony was more than just a chance to see something famous. It was a moment of connection to her past. She thought of her father and how proud he would have been to see her here, experiencing it herself. Her daughter, who was sitting beside her, gave her a gentle nudge. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma smiled, her eyes glistening a little. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is something I've dreamed about for a long time." Her daughter squeezed her hand, silently sharing in the moment. She knew how much this meant to her mother. The Royal Guards weren't just a symbol of national pride for Emma. They were a symbol of family history, of stories passed down through generations. As the guards continued their march, the tourists in the group began to settle into the experience. There was a quiet calm now that had settled over them. The earlier tension had started to melt away, replaced by a sense of wonder and respect for what they were witnessing. The sound of the guards' boots clicking in perfect unison was almost hypnotic. It seemed to bring everyone into the moment, pulling them together as they watched in silence. But the beauty of the ceremony wasn't just in the guards' precision. It was also in the horses. The Royal Guards' horses, tall and majestic, moved gracefully with the same level of discipline as their riders. The horses seemed to glide across the cobblestones, their heads held high, their manes swaying gently with each step. There was a quiet elegance in the way they moved, and for many in the group it was this that truly captivated them. James, who had been so nervous earlier, was now transfixed by the sight of the horses. He had always loved animals, especially horses, and watching them move so gracefully seemed to calm him. His mother watched him closely, relieved to see him so focused and at ease. She had feared that the ceremony would be too much for him, but now, seeing him so absorbed in the moment, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Emma, too, was mesmerized by the horses. The way they moved, their strength and grace reminded her of the stories her father used to tell. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection to her past and to this moment in time. It was as if the ceremony had brought everything full circle, for her. Her father's stories, her own experiences, and now sharing it all with her daughter. As the changing of the guard continued, the tourists around her seemed to relax even more. The earlier tension had faded completely, replaced by a deep appreciation for the history and tradition unfolding before them. Some of the tourists were even taking pictures, trying to capture the moment so they could remember it forever. Others simply watched in awe, taking in every detail from the way the guards' boots clicked against the ground to the way the horses' hooves echoed in the distance. James, still focused on the horses, seemed to forget everything else. His mother could see the change in him. The earlier anxiety had melted away, replaced by a calm focus. She watched him closely, feeling a sense of pride. For her son, this had been a breakthrough. He had managed to push past his fear, to face something new and overwhelming, and to find something that calmed him in the process. She knew that this moment would stay with him for a long time. As the ceremony neared its end, the group of tourists stood quietly, still taking in the spectacle. They watched as the guards continued their march, the precision and discipline of the ceremony still as striking as ever. The horses were now at rest, standing patiently beside their riders, their heads held high. For a moment everything felt still. The noise of the crowd faded into the background, and all that remained was the sense of awe and wonder that had filled the air. It was as if time had slowed down, allowing the tourists to fully appreciate the significance of what they had just witnessed. For some of the tourists, it had been a once-in-a-lifetime experience. For others, it had been a deeply personal moment, connecting them to their past, to their families, and to the traditions that had shaped their lives. For James, it had been a moment of growth, a chance to step outside of his comfort zone and find something that brought him peace. As the ceremony ended and the tourists began to leave, there was a sense of quiet satisfaction in the air. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the memory of the changing of the guard ceremony would stay with them long after they left the palace grounds. As the changing of the guard ceremony continued, something truly unexpected happened. The tourists in the special needs group, who had already been in awe of the Royal Guard's precision and the elegance of the horses, were about to witness an act that would break the usual tradition of stoic discipline. The Royal Guards, who were known for their unflinching seriousness, had always been symbols of discipline. They were taught never to break character. They stood like statues, their faces blank and unreadable, never showing a single emotion. They were trained to maintain their posture for hours, marching and performing their ceremonial duties with the utmost precision. Nothing was supposed to interfere with their duty. But today something was different. It began with one guard. One of the royal guards, who was tall and imposing on his horse, noticed something unusual in the crowd. It was a young girl no older than 10 who had started to show signs of distress. She was holding her mother's hand tightly and her face looked pale. Her eyes were wide with anxiety and she was visibly shaking. The noise, the crowds, and the overwhelming spectacle of the ceremony had taken its toll on her. She had been excited at first, but now she seemed overwhelmed by the busy surroundings. Her mother, trying her best to comfort her, was speaking softly, but nothing seemed to help. The young girl was autistic, and her mother knew that these kinds of crowded, noisy situations were especially difficult for her. But what she didn't expect was what happened next. The royal guard, who had been marching with the others, suddenly broke from his position. Without saying a word, he moved his horse closer to the girl and her mother. The crowd around them started to notice. It was unusual to see a guard step out of formation like that, especially during such an important ceremony. But what made it even more surprising was the guard's actions. He lowered his helmet slightly, a gesture that was not part of the usual protocol. Normally, the guards kept their faces hidden, never revealing any expression. But in this moment, the guard made an exception. His face, though still serious, softened as he looked at the young girl. He gently nodded to her mother, signaling that he had noticed the distress. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, he spoke. His voice was calm, deep, and kind, something that was so different from his usual stern tone. "Is she okay?" he asked the mother quietly, his eyes filled with concern. The mother, surprised by the guard's kindness, looked at him for a moment. She could hardly believe what was happening. The royal guards were known for their strict discipline, and no one ever expected them to show emotion, let alone stop in the middle of their duties to offer help. But here was this guard, breaking character for the sake of the young girl. "She's just a little overwhelmed," the mother replied, her voice shaky with relief. "The noise and the crowd are too much for her." The guard nodded, understanding the situation. He didn't rush to offer a quick solution. Instead, he took a moment to think. Then he made another surprising move. He gently motioned for the other guards to pause. The horses, which had been moving in perfect formation, slowed to a stop, and the rest of the guards, still in their positions, watched curiously. The ceremony was now on hold, but it didn't feel awkward. It felt right. The moment felt like a rare opportunity to show compassion, and the guard knew he couldn't ignore it. Turning back to the young girl and her mother, the guard slowly urged his horse closer. "Would you like to pet the horse?" he asked softly, his voice no longer the commanding tone it usually was. The girl's mother, still in shock, looked at her daughter. The girl hesitated for a moment, her anxiety still visible in her eyes, but then she slowly nodded. The guard gently lowered his horse's head so the young girl could reach out and touch the horse's mane. The horse, calm and patient, stood still, allowing the girl to feel the soft flowing hair. Slowly, the tension in her body began to ease. She reached out, her small fingers brushing against the horse's mane. Her eyes lit up, and for the first time since they had arrived, she smiled. Her mother's heart swelled with gratitude. She had seen how hard her daughter had struggled in these kinds of situations before, how difficult it had been for her to handle the chaos around her. But now, seeing her daughter calm and smiling, she knew that something had changed. The act of kindness from the royal guard had broken through the walls of anxiety, and the girl was beginning to feel at peace. The crowd around them watched in stunned silence. This was not part of the ceremony. This was not what anyone expected from the royal guards. But what had begun as a simple act of compassion had turned into something much more meaningful. The guard, once seen as a symbol of rigid tradition, had shown that there was room for kindness and humanity, even in the most disciplined roles, and it didn't stop there. As the guard remained with the young girl and her mother, a few other guards began to notice the situation as well. They too broke from their positions, though they remained as composed as ever. One by one, they began to approach other members of the special needs group, offering quiet, gentle gestures of kindness. One guard walked over to a man in a wheelchair, who had been struggling to get a clear view of the ceremony. The man's caregiver, who had been trying to adjust his chair, looked up in surprise as the guard stepped forward. Without a word, the guard bent slightly to offer assistance, gently helping to reposition the man's chair so he could see the horses more clearly. It was a small act, but it meant the world to the man and his caregiver. Another guard approached an elderly woman who was sitting on a bench, looking a little anxious about the crowds. The guard, who had been stationed with his horse near the back of the group, walked slowly towards her, his horse's hooves barely making a sound on the cobblestones. He bowed his head slightly and asked if she needed anything. The woman, her eyes wide in surprise, shook her head at first. But then she smiled and said, "Just a little company. It's a lot to take in." The guard nodded and stood beside her for a moment, offering silent support before continuing his duties. As the ceremony continued, the tourists who had been initially nervous or overwhelmed began to relax. The guards had shown them a side of themselves that was rarely seen, and in doing so they had created a deeper connection. The tourists were no longer just watching the ceremony from a distance. They were experiencing it on a personal level, feeling the warmth of the guards' kindness and understanding. The young girl, once so anxious, now stood beside her mother, her eyes still shining from the moment she had shared with the horse. She had found something that calmed her, something that made the world around her feel a little less overwhelming. And it was all thanks to the unexpected kindness of a royal guard who had broken character to show that even in the most disciplined roles, there was room for compassion.